Hey, welcome back. In my last video, I talked about the JCM800 2203 and 2204 amps, the Master Volume Series, and in this video, I'm going to talk about my favorite Marshalls, the split channel JCM800s. So at the very top, I have a 2205, which is the 50 watt head. That one's from 1985. From 1986, in the middle is a 2210 100 watt. And part of the reason why it's been so long for me to get this video out is I was trying to get my hands on one of these. This bottom one is the first year, 1982, 2210 100 watt head. And the reason I was trying to get my hands on this to do the video is despite looking the same and having a lot of similar features, the 82 and 83 and early 84 models are completely different amps internally. They have the same controls and some of the same features, but they really should be treated like totally different amps. I'll go over that a little bit more detail when we get to the technical discussion a little later in the video. But for now, I can demonstrate how these all sound. I'll go over the features really quick so you can see what I'm doing. Since I'm playing the top amp, that's what you heard at the beginning was the 2205. You have a normal channel, which is like a clean, and a boost channel, which is like your drive. The normal channel is not that clean. It's still like a traditional kind of Marshall sort of gritty thing. If you turn the volume on that all the way up, it does get incredibly loud, but it does drive kind of like, you know, like a Plexi or a Master Volume JCM800 amp. But you only have a bass and treble control for that channel for EQing, so it's not quite as versatile. But it is great as like a pedal platform, that kind of thing. The boost channel, you have gain, a channel volume control, as well as the treble middle bass that you would expect to see. And then there's a master section that has the reverb. All of these amps have a spring tank reverb built in, a master volume that controls the volume of both channels together, and the master presence control. On the rear panel, there's also an effects loop, a jack for the 2-button foot switch. I have a modern one here, a 2-button foot switch that allows you to change the channel and turn on and off the reverb. There's also a series effects loop, but that's not foot switchable, and a direct audio out, as well as your usual stuff, the speaker jacks and voltage selector. So I'm going to play a little bit more on this 2205, but one of the things that I wanted to cover in this video was how different these three amps sound, despite visually looking basically the same. So this top one from 85 came with 6550 power tubes and it has Drake transformers. The one below it from 86 has switched over to EL34 tubes and has diagonal transformers. And the one at the bottom also has diagonal transformers, which was common for the 100 watt Marshalls like this. And it has 6550s in it again. Now, theoretically, these top two amps should have the same preamp circuit. The only difference is the power amp, but there is a very clear difference between the way these two amps sound, which is part of the reason why I kept both of them all this time. And I'll demonstrate that a little bit once you get to hear the amps. So starting off with the 2205, that's what you heard when you first came in. And I'm going to keep playing it on the same settings that I had, but I'll show you the clean channel to start. So that was without the reverb. If I kick the reverb on, you'll hear that. It's actually a really nice sounding tone. I like that it has a little bit of grit to it, but it is not as like bright and chimey as maybe a Fender type amp, but it's perfectly usable. If I had an attenuator, I could show you, but the channels, I have heard that these do channel bleed. Like if you have the volume set too high on your normal channel, then you'll hear that overtone in your drive channel. None of the three that I have do that, but I don't know if that's just good luck or what. The top two amps have not been touched. They're still in their original caps, original transformers. The tubes are newer. Well, the top one has the original 6550s actually. The bottom one has Winged C EL34, so those are a little newer. But nothing that makes me think that, you know, I would expect there to be channel bleed, but supposedly the channel bleed is a lot more common on the earlier amps, like this one. And this one has been fully recapped, so I don't have any channel bleed on it right now, but it's possible that as the components wear and get out of spec, they will bleed over a little bit more. So something to be aware of in this very, very early channel switcher design. Both channels are actually on at all times, just one of them is muted and the other one is unmuted, basically. So let's jump back over to the drive channel and you can hear that again. So right now I have the treble set at about 4, and there is a very clear difference between the treble on this amp being set a little higher, so it can get much more aggressive than this. So let's turn that treble up a little bit. I'll go to like maybe 7-ish. I don't want it to be too bright. I'll roll the mids back maybe between 3 and 4, and I'll take the bass down just a little bit. But the bass, these aren't super bassy amps, so they're not really in danger of flubbing out. I've actually played these detuned a little bit, and they sound pretty good for that as well. But let's hear how this sounds, and remember all this is unboosted. I do have a pedal board in front of me, but right now all I have on is the noise gate. There's no boosts, but I will add in the tube screamer in just a moment so you can hear what that sounds like boosted. That sounds pretty awesome to me. If I roll the gain down a little bit, it does clean up pretty well. And just to get this out of the way now, yes, these amps do have clipping diodes in them. And no, I do not think that hurts the tone that much. They sound pretty good to me, but I don't find them to be too diode heavy. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the schematic. So here it is with the gain on half. I'll roll the mids up just a little bit, but I'll keep the treble high and you can hear how bright it sounds. And it's still pretty touch sensitive even with the volume control on the guitar. but I really like it with the gain all the way max. And the reverb surprisingly doesn't have too negative of effect on the tone. So here it is. The reverb is on. And reverb off. Some early amps that have the reverb built in have a tendency to, whenever the reverb is engaged, it like chops off some highs or some lows, or otherwise makes the amp not sound that great. Luckily that's not a problem on these amps. These do have the original spring reverb tanks in them. Let me change the settings back to kind of the way that I prefer it. That's bass at 10, mids on 6, and then I usually set the treble on this amp to about 4. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a riff with the amp set like that, and then I'm going to switch down here to the 2210, which is from a year later, and you'll notice that the treble on that amp actually is set to 6, and it's going to sound close-ish, but this 2210, for whatever reason, is much thicker, less aggressive, but a little bit fuller sounding. So I'll just play the same riff, and then I'll cut the video so that you can hear the two back to back. Yeah, so you can hear that the 86 just happens to be a little bit smoother, a little bit warmer, and that's with the treble set higher than the amp above it. If I set it the same way, it actually gets really, really rolled off. Still sounds really good, but it's certainly a lot smoother, and because of that, it doesn't get quite as aggressive. So if I crank the treble up a little bit, roll the mids back. But it's actually a little bit sweeter on the ears, even though it's not quite as aggressive. So I don't really know which one I prefer more. Maybe it just depends on what style of music you're going for. So, but let me bring the mids up a little bit. I really think this is just a killer rock amp, and that's kind of the settings that I feel sound the best. just a really, really great sound. And the ability to channel switch is obviously wonderful as well, because you can do all sorts of stuff with that. And obviously the effects loop works wonderfully. I'll put a delay on. The only kind of negative is if I have the reverb is located before the effects loop. So just for example, that's with the reverb on. But if I engage my noise gate, it actually cuts the tail of the reverb. So that's a little disappointing, maybe, but I'll kick on the delay here, which is after my noise gate. So there you go. Yeah, just a really great sounding amp for that kind of stuff. Just does rock and classic metal, in my opinion, better than any other amp, and that includes a lot of boutique stuff. And I think you'd be surprised. I think there's a lot of ideas that were kind of lifted from this design of the amp that made it into amps that you're still using today. So now I'm going to switch down to the very bottom one, the 1982 model, and you can hear what that sounds like. I'll play that same Skid Row riff, that way you can hear what that sounds like through this amp. So as you can hear, it's a lot more muted, a lot less aggressive, and it's really a pretty far departure from like a traditional Marshall sound. I think the top two amps could do a pretty good 2203 impression if you really needed them to. This amp does not really do that. It's really a different amp, and like I said, internally it's also basically a completely different amp. And stay tuned for the technical discussion if you want to get into that. But for right now, you'll notice that my controls are completely different on this amp, and it still sounds like that. I actually have the presence a little higher at 6. I have the treble almost between 7 and 8, and the bass rolled off quite a bit more than the other amps. And even if I bring up the bass and roll the mids back, maybe if I take the treble even higher, it still never really gets that aggressive. It's still a really good sounding amp, but it is, again, very, very different than the other ones. So if you're shopping one of these, make sure you find out if you have the earlier or the later version. If you have any amp that starts in 82 or 83, that's the P and R numbers on the serial number, then you definitely have the earlier version. If you have anything that's like T and later, that is the later version of the circuit, and you'll have that more aggressive sound. If you have the, I believe it's S is 1984. If you have that model, the easiest way to check if you have the earlier or later version is to remove the V2 tube, the second tube. If you remove that tube and you lose the drive channel, the boost channel, then you have the earlier version. If you remove V2 and you still have the boost channel, then you have the later version. So that's a really easy way to tell. Obviously, if you open it up, it's pretty clearly different as well. So I'm going to demo a couple more sounds on this. I'll put my delay back on in the effects loop so you can hear some solo tones. Let me turn the mids back up. And I have the treble and presence absolutely maxed out. This is as bright as this amp gets. And even if I add an overdrive pedal in front, I can get maybe a little bit more out. So yeah, still a good sounding amp, just very different. And here's the clean channel on that amp, which actually I'd argue maybe sounds a hair better than the newer versions. Let me turn off the delay there. And here's the reverb. It does make for a really good pedal platform, just like the other amps as well. I'm kick on, let's try the Big Muff. And maybe the Joyo Ultimate Drive. All right, let's talk about the technical stuff. Hey, welcome to the technical section, and I'm just going to talk about sort of the circuit, just like we did for the last video. It's just a little more convenient if I can sit here at my computer and show you, rather than sitting back there where the amps are. So first things first, on the back, let me go to the 1982 model. I have a lot of pictures of these amps on my website as well as the schematics, so if you need to refer to any of this stuff, you know, this material is all here. But if you look on the back of one of these amps, in this case the 82 model, you'll have the serial number, and then in my case the model ends in P. That's for my 1982 model. That letter is how you know what year the amp was made, you know, externally. You could date some of the caps or something inside, but you never know what's been replaced. So, and there's this handy reverb article I'm going to refer to here. Our first year is 1982 for these amps, so there it is, 1982 P and R. Those are the early versions of the amp, like I said. S is the transition year. So the difference is between 84 and 92, the serial number letter is at the beginning. So instead of the number and then the letter, if I look at my 85 one, you can see the serial number starts with T, the letter, and then the number afterwards. If you have one of these that starts with S, you have to do that remove V2 thing to verify which version of the circuit you have. And then these were made all the way up until 1990, so the latest one I've ever seen has a Y serial number. I don't think any made it into the Z's, but I could be wrong. There might be a handful, but by that time they've switched over to the JCM800 line. This amp was kind of replaced, I guess, by the 4100, but they are very, very different amps. And this amp also ran concurrently with like the Silver Jubilee, which I need to talk about again. Actually, my first video on that was pretty rough, so I'd like to cover that amp again. But just jumping straight into the schematic here, this is the earlier version of the amp. And if you look, you've got your input over here on the left-hand side. And if you're on the normal channel, this is very nicely noted schematic as well. On the normal channel, you have one tube gain stage, and then it immediately goes into your tone stack. So here's your treble, volume, bass, but those controls, and it comes off of the volume, goes down here, and if we follow the line of this path, skips over the V2 tube entirely. That's how you know that if you remove V2 and you still have your clean channel, that's how you know you have the earlier version of the amp. And then it comes back in here to the mixer amp. This is the final gain stage for the boost channel, only the second gain stage for the normal channel. And gives you a tube buffered reverb, drive, and recovery, as well as the tube buffered effects loop right here, and then on to the power amp. So something very interesting about this power amp, here's the phase splitter tube. If you look at this power amp, and you can see this internally in the amp, but the master volume is a post phase inverter master volume, and it is a dual ganged pot. So most pots, you know, it's a single value, but if you look at a dual gang pot, and I do have a picture of it, I can show you what a dual gang pot looks like. So this is the inside of the 82 model. Let me open that. And this pot VR10 up here at the top left, that is a dual gang pot. You'll see it has two sections as compared to the single sections of all the other pots. So basically what you have is a master volume located after the PI, but it's actually attenuating the signal in two different channels. And those go to each power tube individually. So this is a 50 watt model that I'm showing here. So there's just the one, or the two power tubes, but the 100 watt version, you know, you just have an extra tube on either side of that it's going to. So very, very interesting design there. All right, the boost channel on the early versions of the amp never makes it to V1A. It actually splits off here. If we follow this trace around, it comes into V1B as the first gain stage. And then here's the really, really interesting part. The EQ is located right after this. So here's your treble, middle, bass controls, and then that leads directly into the gain control right here. I kind of cluttered that up a little bit, but here's your gain control right here. And that gain control is also a dual gang pot, just like the master volume, so it affects the signal in two places. Both of these spots are the gain control. But very, very interesting that the tone stack is before the gain control. The Mesa Mark amps do this. The PV Triumph does this. But I can't think of very many other amps that use this kind of arrangement. But usually the Mesa Mark, you know, kind of design is super, super, you turn the treble way up, and that's how you get more gain out of the amp. And you can get a little bit more gain out of the earlier circuit by turning the treble all the way up, but as you heard, it's still pretty dark amp. It's it's definitely not like turning the treble to max on a 2203 or something like that. That would be really painful in the ears. So just really interesting design there. Then you've got your second tube gain stage, and then the third part of the tube here, the V2B, is a cathode follower that then leads to a quad of clipping diodes. So that adds a lot of like grit and drive to the distortion signal, and that is right before the channel volume pot, and that leads into the same path as we did before. You've got your one final gain stage here that goes directly into the reverb driver, reverb recovery, effects loop, and then power amp, master volume speakers. And these clipping diodes are a popular thing that people clip out. So I've seen quite a few mods for these amps where people remove these 4 diodes, and it will clean up the amp a little bit and get rid of some of that solid state sort of fuzziness, or however you like to describe it. Personally, I think it sounds great with those in there. If I go back over to the pictures of the internals of that amp, I actually have a picture. Same one that I showed before, actually, but you can see those clipping diodes. They are right here. Those are the 4 clipping diodes for the boost channel, and they're located right next to the volume control for that channel, and then here is the dual gang gain pot for the boost channel. Make sure you don't remove these diodes. These are for the power amp. So you don't want to remove those. That could cause some serious problems. And then just coincidentally, here is the bias pot for the power tubes. It's actually, for an old amp, it's pretty nicely laid out. Like, it's very nice and simple. And kind of like we talked about with the 2203, the earlier amps have these enormous filter capacitors. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 large filter capacitors in place. This one has USA made General Electric 6550 tubes, and these, if you look up these numbers, these are diagonal transformers, UK made. But interestingly, the choke is a Drake transformer, so that's kind of unique. And I mentioned the V2 test. So V2 is this tube. If you were looking at the back of the amp, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. This is the phase inverter or phase splitter. So if you remove V2, then you lose the boost channel on this amp. That's how you can tell. I've said that probably too many times now. But yeah, that is the earlier version of the amp. Let's talk about the later one, and you can see just how different they are. Okay, so comparing the earlier to the later version, here's the earlier one, and then here's the later one, and you can see there's immediately very, very different design in this amp. So if we go the normal channel again, here's your input. Goes to the first gain stage, V1A, and then you've got a bass control, and then your treble control, and then that goes to the volume control after that. So your EQ is before your volume on that normal channel. And then if we follow that signal down, it goes through the V2A side. That's your second tube gain stage. And then I'll follow this around, and it goes into the third tube gain stage, V2B. And that's why removing the V2 tube will kill your clean channel on the later version. And then if I just keep tracing that, let's see, it goes down like this, and then it goes to G. Where's G? Okay, then it goes to G. G comes in here, and then we're going past these controls because that's the end of the boost channel. And then we come into, this is the reverb drive and reverb recovery stage. I'm not going to cover that too much detail. And then your reverb pot for the mix. If you have the reverb disabled, then you just skip all that stuff and you go straight over here to the effects loop and return. And then if we follow that, it goes into V4A, and that's your effects loop recovery stage or buffer stage. And then Y is where the signal comes out of that. That goes to the power amp. But there's no controls in the power amp besides presence, so I'm not going to show that here. Let me talk about the boost channel really quick. All right, boost channel. So you're plugged in, and the main difference here is that the boost channel still uses V1A as your first gain stage, so that's one, but it skips the EQ that the normal channel would be using, and the V2 tube entirely, and then goes directly into your gain control here, which has, again, it's dual gang, so there's one gain spot there, and then the other gain is here after the next tube stage. So you've got one tube stage, gain pot, and then a second tube stage and a gain pot. And then that goes through, there's a clipping diode on that pot. There's another diode here, I'll talk about that in just a moment, but let me finish the topology here. You've got your channel volume control, and then V3A is your third tube gain stage, and then that goes to B. B comes in here, and this is your treble control, mid control, bass control, so there's your EQ section, and then your master volume control is before the reverb and effects loop and phase splitter on this amp. It is not a post phase inverter master volume. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is these two diodes, and W005 is a rectifier bridge. This is what's adding clipping to this amp, but there is substantially less diode clipping in the later versions of the amp, even though they have more gain on tap. It's because of the way their tube gain stages are set up. So this diode and diode bridge under W005, that is off of the channel volume pot, kind of in the same position that it was in on the previous model amp here, but substantially less clipping going on in that stage. And then the other diode, and this one confuses me a little bit, so maybe somebody that's a little more versed in this can help me out, tell me what this is supposed to do. But it's a diode that is off of the resistor on the second gain stage, and just like a JCM800 2203, the later circuit 2210 and 2205 amps have a cold clipper. This 10K resistor is biasing this second gain stage really cold, which causes some asymmetric clipping. Which is part of the reason why the amp sounds a lot grittier and, to my ears, more pleasant than the earlier circuit, which is a little bit smoother. But I'm not really sure what this diode is doing. I think it's preventing the bias voltage from going too low. So yeah, if you know exactly what that's there for, leave a comment, let me know, because I'm actually really curious. I don't understand why that's there. But yeah, this amp having 3 tube gain stages and a cold clipper is actually a little more similar to a 2203 than the earlier design, which really is nothing like a 2203. Totally different amp design. So this is basically like it's basically a modded Marshall by Marshall. It's a 2203 with an extra clipping diode, and then instead of a cathode follower driving the tone stack, it's just a regular anode gain stage. So definitely a unique design. I haven't seen anything else like this from any other manufacturers, so part of the reason why I have 3 of them, 2 of the later circuit and 1 of the earlier one. They're just really, really cool amps. And I do have some information on my website, like the schematics are here on the Totally Rad Guitars website if you need that. I also have pictures of all the internals of mine. You can see like I have newer caps, these mod caps over here in the bottom right by the bias pot. But if you're curious about anything about the amps, you can look at them. I have the model numbers of the spring reverb tank in there. On the 2205 page, I need to take some more pictures, but I have the Drake transformers pictured in the original LCR capacitors. But yeah, thank you for watching. Have a good one.